So with the upcoming FanFest in Knda in April, I thought this would be a good opportunity to kind of discuss the expectations for the upcoming expansion 8.0 and kind of the things that I would like to see and also things I don't want to see. These are gonna be more, I suppose, like macro level, like broader things. As opposed to, I'm not gonna be talking about like specific settings or plot points or what characters I want to. Well, I'll touch on characters a bit broadly, but no, like I'm not gonna go into like fine details. This is like more broadly. I may do another one where I maybe talk more about details. I guess I'll get straight down to talking about the list. So this was something I remember feeling after I finished Endwalker. Because after Endwalker, I was kind of reflecting back on the Heavensward story. That it was a lot more grounded in a sense. Which is kind of funny because it was actually kind of epic in scale. I mean, it was literally a 1,000-year war between dragons and people that we put a stop to. But it goes to show how batshit insane the story has gotten since, that even that sounds very tame. And then in Stormblood we basically had a World War II scenario, and again, even that is like super tame by today's standards. And I feel like this has been a deliberate effort by the writers, by the developers. Well, there is this term online that people have used to like kind of meme on these kinds of writers, like subverting expectations. I don't think it's that popular anymore, but it was definitely a lot of people use that as a meme. Like I think back when Game of Thrones Season 8 came out and stuff like that. It's kind of natural that even though back then the story was a bit more grounded, at some point, especially when we talk about the game that has ran for 10 plus years, like FF14, with many expansions, it's kind of natural that you have to kind of raise the stakes. This does make sense, but what I would like to see nevertheless is that for 8.0, to maybe slow things down a bit, and again have it be a bit more grounded rather than another Doomsday scenario, because I feel like they kind of debated us both times with the post-Endwalker story and the Dawn Trail story, that it began with a similar mentality, like, but then that lasts only for a short moment, and then we go back to like, oh, there's some world-ending scenario, big stakes again. You can't make the stories as boring, like nothing is happening. You do need to have some stakes and some, you know, threats, of course. I'm not saying like we should just go somewhere and just chill, you know, on some island. But what I mean is that, well, Dawn Trail is a prime example. It kind of goes from 0 to 100 really fast, just out of nowhere, with the whole threat of the, what are those guys called again? Preservation, you know, and all that stuff that's happening in the ninth. It kind of just comes, I don't want to say completely out of nowhere, of course, it's to be expected, there are other shards. But yeah, it was kind of like, it was leading up to be a lower stakes expansion, and then all of a sudden this. So I would kind of want to see an expansion that's a bit more like Heavensward, in terms of like, there is this one conflict, and that's it. And it's a bit more grounded. That's just what I would like to see. I do have this this image here to demonstrate my point. I drew this ages ago on like MS Paint, so forgive the crappy quality. But what you can kind of see here is, I kind of feel like over time, of course the quality of the story has gone up massively, right? When we talk about production value, you know, we have better animations, better graphics, better voice acting. Although I guess the Dawn Trail haters might disagree on that with a certain character, but yeah, I would say overall these aspects have massively improved. And on top, I would say qualitatively as well, or like in terms of writing, characters are also a lot more enjoyable, have been over time, especially since Shadowbringers. But I also feel like at the same time, the plot has kind of gotten weak. I don't know, this is the impression I get, and mainly when I speak about this, I'm talking about the fact that, like I said, it has gotten a lot more batshit insane over the years. Like the escalation has been just off the chart. If you look at first it was basically just, oh, we need to drive this empire out of our land, and then in the span of one expansion it goes into like, oh shit, there's like this apocalyptic scenario and we're doing interdimensional time travel, and there's like some branching timeline with an apocalypse where the world ends, and then the next expansion, it's once again some more time travel, and oh, by the way, we're the only star surviving in the entire universe, and we have to go to the edge of the expanse to defeat the embodiment of despair itself. And it's just, it feels like there should have been maybe like 1 or 2 expansions wedged in between, because when you look at it like broadly, that the jump was kind of insane. Like, how did we go from fighting the Garleans to defeating the Endsinger? You know, it's kind of, that's just how I feel. Another thing I wanted to show here, when we talked about subverting expectations, so I actually have this video from back in the day. My camera is over it. Give me a sec. So this is from November 23rd, 2021. So this video was actually, I released this before Endwalker even came out. So here I make the point.
Everybody here, where do you think that expansion 5.0 will take the Warrior of Light?
During this video, I kind of make the argument that, in my opinion, it was a mistake that this expansion, like the end of Stormblood patches, like they were clearly leading up to the Garland mode segment, right? Like some kind of Garland mode expansion. And, you know, this in this fanfest, I think that was the first fanfest for Shadowbringers. You can tell by the audience, like that was clearly the expectation, right? And it kind of makes sense when you look at the patch content. But then they all of a sudden they pull the rug from underneath everyone and kind of say, well, actually, you are gonna be going to the first instead. The reason I showed the date of this video at the beginning was because, yeah, like, here's even, like, I put up some Reddit comments from back in the day. People arguing, like, was this a good decision? So I feel like this is important to bring up, especially, again, with when I release the video, because some people might say, like, oh, I'm just being, like, a, what do you call it? Like, a contrarian, right? Like, I just want to make the case in retrospect, like, oh, you know, actually Shadowbringers was really bad. This is why I'm glad that I released this video before Endwalker even came out, so nobody can kind of gaslight me. But no, this was actually kind of a debate back then. It's hard to believe with how well received Shadowbringers is nowadays, but, you know, they did do some, I don't want to say like big mistakes back then, but yeah, some small things. It was definitely a rug pull. So I actually do have a segment with George R. Martin in this video, where he kind of discusses this tendency of certain writers to, they kind of panic when they see like, oh, people figured out what's gonna happen, and then they make like changes last minute. And he kind of speaks about the fact that it's a mistake, because if you set things up to work a certain way, you know, you set up the clues, you should follow through with it, because if you make changes last minute, then things are gonna break and the story is gonna hurt over it. So that's kind of what George R. Martin is talking about here. By the way, it's funny that back when I made this video, we were waiting for his book, The Winds of Winter, and it still hasn't come out, dude. And that was basically all I wanted to show in that regard. So on the whole topic of subverting expectations, right? Now, of course, Shadowbringers, I kind of make this argument in my video as well, that nevertheless, Shadowbringers ended up being a banger story. But in my opinion, this is in spite of this change, not because of it. So, and if you look at the longer period of time, I do think that Garland mode got kind of screwed over, right? Because it was set up to be this threat for a very long time, and then it kind of gets dissolved off screen, and then we get like this tiny segment with Garland mode in Endwalker. I'll get that into that a bit later, because I have kind of a topic revolving around it. The next question I guess we could ask is, can a more grounded story work? Because see, this is very interesting when we look at the reception of the two halves of Dawn Trail, like 7.0 MSQ, right? Because I've seen it, it's honestly kind of a 50-50 split. Half the people think the first half was really good, and the second half was really bad. And then the other 50% think the first half was terrible, and the second half was actually the good part. So it's kind of interesting because the first half is a more grounded story, right? So here we see that it is a bit divisive. I feel like it kind of gives us a clue. You cannot please both groups, I feel. So you kind of just have to pick one and commit. So either you go like the batshit insane route of, let's say, Endwalker, or you pick a more grounded story, like Heaven's Word, even arguably Stormblood as well.
Blue Typhoon has something to say. They did have to cut a big portion of Endwalker for the time's sake, unfortunately, really.
It was, yeah. And this is
Wait,
a good...
I have a question.
Yeah.
Was there a lot of cut content for Endwalker? Because I didn't know that.
So this is a good bridge, actually, to the next topic I wanted to discuss, which was that another thing I want to see from the expansion 8.0 is I wanted to have one big focus as opposed to a split focus. Because this has been a very common theme, right? It started back in Stormblood, and there was an interview with Yoshida where he straight up said that yes, initially we planned the entire Stormblood story to take place in Alamigo, and that was kind of the idea behind it. But for whatever reason, they felt that this wasn't enough. It wasn't, you know, epic enough. There wasn't enough content to make of it. So they decided to include the Far East and kind of call it like the Liberator story. Actually, I did want to add to the Garlemald comment that they did kind of have a band-aid fix in that we had some side story, like the Weapons Trio series in Shadowbringers or Bozia story, that kind of did expand on the Garlemald story a bit, and it did help kind of improve the situation. Yeah, I kind of do think they did Garlemald really dirty, and that's what I'm gonna discuss more in a bit when we discuss Endwalker. So Stormblood, yeah, they decide, okay, instead of just Alamigo, we're gonna have Alamigo plus the Far East, right? And this was one of the major criticisms for Stormblood MSQ back in the day, was definitely that people felt, again, it was the same thing. Some people really liked one part, but hated the other, and vice versa. It's pretty rare to come across a person who liked both. Of course, a lot of people say like, oh, Ishikawa wrote the Doma segment, so it's a lot better by default. It's kind of funny. Yeah, it was a common debate back then, and you know, it still could be argued like, was it actually a good decision? Then they made the same decision again in Endwalker. We know that initially, the initial drafts for their story was that there was going to be 2 expansions, right? There was going to be one focused on Garlemald, and Anima was going to be the final boss, basically. That was the first expansion. And then we had another expansion that focused on Zodiac, Kaidon, and, you know, basically ending that original saga. Of course, that was... people kind of exaggerate in this regard. We know that that original draft was actually axed really early on. They really didn't go that far with it, to be honest. But yeah, fundamentally, I do think that was a mistake, because you can really tell Endwalker, it really suffers a lot from this split focus. Because I do feel like, for example, with Elpis, we don't get enough time with certain characters, namely Hermes. And they don't really get enough time to set up the important elements to make that whole thing stick. And I also would argue, I think I make this argument. Actually, I don't think I made this argument in any of my analysis yet, but in my opinion, there was a certain moral grayness to the ancients in Shadowbringers, which was kind of lost in Endwalker. It was made a lot more simple, like, oh, actually these guys were just in the wrong, and, you know, screw them, basically, was the overall idea, in my opinion, behind Endwalker. And I feel like that is a result of them not just having enough time to flesh it out, so they had to simplify it. And of course, the Garlemald segment, yes, I do think the way they handled Garlemald was really awful. It's especially funny, I often speak about this with my friend who is also a big fan of Garlemald, like the Garlemald segment in Endwalker. In my opinion, it was one of the best parts of the MSQ. That's why I'm extra butthurt that, you know, they didn't do more with it, because it shows the potential it could have had. I theorized in my Benar video that the reason they went for this was they were just kind of tired, like fatigued, and just wanted to end the story and start a new one. Which, you know, if that was the reason, I mean, I guess fair play, you know, we can't really force the developers and the writers and the artists to, you know, continue making a story. You know, you do need to have fresh ideas and fresh stories. But nevertheless, I do think it would have been better to have 2 expansions in that case. And with the most recent addition, of course, we had Dawn Trail, which once again there is a 2-way split. First it's about Kurang, and then all of a sudden the Ninth and Alexandria. So at this point, I don't know about you guys, but me personally, I'm just a bit tired of this like dual focus each expansion. I would prefer that the next one is just you do this one place, there is this one conflict, and that's it. Like, don't juggle 2 things at once, because in my opinion it just doesn't work. And I think there's a reason why Heavensward and Shadowbringers are so fond. People think of those expansions so fondly, because they are both the expansions that had this singular focus. Then the next thing I would like to see in the next expansion is, I wrote down in my notes literally, an actual new set of characters. I feel like Dawn Trail was kind of a debate, right? We were kind of told like, and you know, you can even see this, for example, with the like the art material for the expansion, that, you know, it was gonna be these new characters like Wuklamat, Erenville, I guess Cryon, kind of. But then they kept like shoehorning the Scions to the point of absurdity, right? Like, sometimes it's like, why are you even here, dude? What are you doing here? You know, there's that meme where that British guy's like, what are you doing here? Basically that.
And they kind of written themselves into a corner, right? They make the Scions so iconic in the other expansions, and now they reach the problem where like, oh shit, they're so iconic. So like, from a business standpoint, it doesn't make sense to not include them.
I think,
because fans want to see them.
I think the best way to feature them is actually seen literally in Dawn Trail itself, which is if you look at the portrayal of Estinian in Dawn Trail, right? Like, he kind of just randomly shows up, but he's not like very involved. I feel like that's the best way to do it. You know, you can just have some cameos where it's like, oh, Tancred shows up for a bit, and I think that's how
basically what Estinian did, right? He went on vacation.
Yeah. I feel like Estinian was really well portrayed in Dawn Trail. I think the rest of them should have been exactly the same. So that's one thing I want to see changed in 8.0. I would like to have the new characters actually get a spotlight. And I wrote here like, retire the Scions. But again, I mean something very specific with that. I don't mean that, you know, you like yeet them completely out of the story or even kill them, because, you know, some people are proposing like, oh, just kill the Scions off. In my opinion, that would be terrible writing. Please don't do that. I think it would be incredibly cheap, right, to have like, oh, Alice dies in a cutscene to add some tension. At that point, I would like kind of rage at Yoshida, like, that's such a dumb choice. So I'm not talking about like complete outright removing them. Again, I just mean just have them more in the background and don't try to shoehorn them in like they did in Dawn Trail. I think that was a mistake. When we talk about new characters, well, you don't really even need to create all new characters. You can actually make use of existing ones. Cryon is a prime example of that, which they already did in Dawn Trail. But, you know, there are some other characters I would like to see more of. For example, Zero and Gaia, which I know those two are kind of unpopular opinions, maybe. I know especially a lot of people hate Gaia. To me, it just kind of makes sense that if you've already laid the groundwork and you've developed the character before, and they even appear in the MSQ, might as well use them. I especially mentioned Gaia and Zero because they are very interesting as characters, right? There's a lot of potential. I mean, one is literally a previous Ascian, or well, currently, technically, an Ascian, and the other is a native of the 13th. And those are some very interesting concepts that, you know, you could make use of. I don't know, because to me it's always exciting with a new expansion to see new characters, right? And at this point I'm kind of starting to just get really tired of just seeing the Scions. Again, especially if you're not gonna do anything with them.
Typhoon says, I still remember when they brought back Mifrid from ARR for Stormblood. Great use of reusing old characters. And then Chef Dante said, and then they killed the poor Mifrid right on the gate. Out the gate.
Oh, is that the lad who gets clapped like almost immediately? Bro. Well, they did kind of a similar thing with, oh my god, I'm forgetting his name. The guy in the wheelchair. Is he Ironvolt, something like that? His name? Yeah, I think his name is Ironvolt or something. But yeah, like they did him kind of similar dirty, you know. He just shows up and he gets immediately like wounded and put in the wheelchair, and I don't think we've heard of him since.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny. On the topic of time travel, Right. So there was a comment by Yoshida. I think it was sometime after Endwalker came out. Or was it sometime after Dawn Trail? I don't remember, bro. I'm honestly too lazy to look it up, so my source for now is trust me, bro. But yeah, there was this comment by Yoshida at some point where he was kind of floating this idea that we could maybe use time travel to, for example, go to the third Astrum era. You know, when the Elegants were around and things like that. And this is something that me personally, I'm just vehemently against. I'm gonna be blunt about this because I would rather not FF14 turn into, you know, some kind of Marvel, you know, universe thing where there's just this multiverse, like, time travel rubbish, you know, just constant fan service, like, oh, what if we go here? You know, I'm not a big fan of it. So to continue on the whole time travel topic. Now, of course, there is a precedent both in FF14 itself and in actually the series as a whole. I mean, for God's sakes, the OG game from 1987 has a time travel plot, which is kind of funny to think back nowadays. It's kind of a primitive plot. It's kind of like Garland just messes around with the four fiends, sends himself in the past, and then blah blah blah. It's pretty basic, a pretty basic plot. And ever since then, time travel has appeared in some of the mainline games and some spin-offs and sequels. So it's not entirely unheard of to have time travel in FF14, in the Final Fantasy series. And again, indeed, FF14 itself, already in Heavensward with Alexander, featured time travel. And I'm gonna say, in my opinion, Alexander was the best use of time travel, right? Because it was just this side story. And it was actually kind of cool the way they tied it in, you know? Especially when you like do the raid and you basically save yourself from the past. It's a pretty straightforward story and it's utilized really well, and I didn't mind that. Then they used it again in Shadowbringers. That was kind of whatever. It was basically just brushed over. And then, of course, again in Endwalker. So, of course, there are many different types of time travel and ways you can utilize it as a writer. I would kind of say there are three ways you can utilize time travel. So the first one is the example I just mentioned, the MCU way, which is that you use like multiverse. And in my opinion, this is the worst way to use it. And I will tell you why. It's because when you have a multiverse thing, there are no constraints around time travel that you need to take into account as a writer. There are no consequences to the time travel. So you can basically, because you know, you can say like, oh, there's an infinite number of universes and blah, blah, blah. And so it's usually just a tool to just bang out fan service, essentially. It's usually what it boils down to. So I don't really like that. The second way is the opposite. Like you have a time travel story and it's integral to the story, and you make it so that the plot revolves around it, and there's like some paradox and like there are hard rules about the time travel that influences things. That's kind of cool. Then I would argue the third method is kind of the FF14 method, which is that we do have time travel in FF14, but it's almost irrelevant in a sense that it's kind of clear that the writers don't expect you to really take the time travel seriously. It's kind of just brushed aside, right? I guess that's one way to do it, but again, I'd rather not have it at all in the future. FF14 is also just very confusing because it uses time travel 3 times, and each time it works slightly differently in the same story. It's kind of like, again, it's best to just not think about it. Actually, I remember when Endwalker came out, I actually had a bunch of my friends like type out to me that they were kind of confused about some things about the time travel. Like, for example, there was one time my friend asked me like, so what actually happened the first time in Elpis? And he was super confused when I replied to him that there was no first time. Or like, the first time was the one that happens in the story. This is because, look guys, I'm gonna be honest, I'm not a time travel story writer expert, so someone can chime in if I'm completely wrong on this, but as I understand it, the way the time travel works specifically in Endwalker is it's something called a causal loop. We humans perceive the passing of time in a natural way. There is the past, the present, and the future. It's like ABC, it's linear, right? And what you can do if you make a story with a causal loop, you can kind of play around with it. You know, you can say instead of ABC, it does like, you switch it up, it's like BAC, for example. The causality of events it's like different in the case of Endwalker, where us going to the past as the Warrior of Light is actually the first event. There was nothing before it, or like some kind of first time, so to speak. Which I know that sounds like kind of confusing, and especially because then it kind of raises all kinds of interesting questions, like, you know, for example, the Warrior of Light tells Vena in Elpis about Heidelin, right? That Heidelin exists, that, you know, she's gonna become this goddess, right, later on. And then, because of that information, Vena becomes Heidelin. So then you might stop to ask, so where did this idea of Heidelin come from, right? Well, it cannot have come from the Warrior of Light, because we learn it, like, as we play the game through A Realm Reborn and so on. But also cannot be Vena, because the Warrior of Light tells them. But this is something I think is called like a bootstrap paradox or something, which is that in this case the idea basically never existed. It just came out of nowhere. But basically it came as a result of the time travel, hence it's a paradox.
Chef Dante says, I'd really like to see time travel to the dark future, because it'll be cool to see the new generation of Ironworks in Midgard-Zomer.
Yeah, so something I want to comment on. This is a really cool comment because in the Shadowbringers side stories, I think they're called like Tales from the Shadows, one of those side stories actually shows that alternative timeline where the calamity, the 8th Umbral calamity happened. And it's really cool because it's kind of like Midgard-Zomer finally wakes up. And I have kind of thought about it, like, oh, I wonder, like, are they gonna have something where, like, Midgard-Zomer and Heidelin and the 12, but basically, yeah, like, Midgard-Zomer, Heidelin, and 12, they, like, go fight the Endsinger or something, bro, I don't know. But it sounds kind of badass.
Yeah. Nari Yekis also has a comment as well. He says, definitely needs more darkness. As long as we can time travel as far away from what felt like a fluffy Dawnchill as we can, I'll get a resub when 8.0 comes out.
So you guys want time travel just to get rid of Vuk Lamat? I mean, okay, I think you guys have convinced me to want time travel. If it means getting rid of Vuk, I'm fine with it. That is pretty funny. Wait, I was just gonna add like a side comment on the whole like Midgard-Zomer thing, because I remember when I played Endwalker MSQ, and you know when you have that moment before you fight the Endsinger, and you know the fucking thing starts like shattering, right? And you're like, oh my god, who is it? I actually thought that was gonna be Midgard-Zomer like coming through it, but instead it was fucking Xenos. But yeah, in my opinion, it was a bit of an L that Midgard-Zomer played no role in like preventing the final days.
Yeah, so that was really strange in my opinion. I found that very strange.
Yeah, but so in that sense, it would be kind of cool to see that like alternate timeline and Midgard-Zomer this time actually does something. Because me personally, Midgard-Zomer has always been one of my faves. It's kind of hard to explain why. I just really like his character, like this very divine, mysterious being, for whom like even dying is just kind of an inconvenience. Like, oh, I'll just rest up a few hundred years and come back. It's fine, bro. So I'd love to see more Midgard-Zomer, yeah, and I would like to see this executed in a tasteful way. Like maybe you could do it, but don't make it like super fan servicey. Maybe, I mean, it could literally just be like some kind of echo cutscene or something, where we just see like, oh, what actually happened to those guys. But I mean, we do also have the side stories, so I feel like I'm just saying I don't want to have time travel to like in the story proper to explore this. Me personally, I don't think it's worth it.
Chef Dante, he says, when you put it like that, it makes me think it'll be a better premise for an ultimate raid. LOL.
Getting rid of Lamat?
Yeah. I think that's what.
Why are you talking about the Midgard-Zomer? I'm kind of confused. But both sound kind of cool. Like, bro, imagine.
Well, you gotta keep in mind there's.
Bro, it is so funny because you know we already had an ultimate raid dedicated to that Dragon Song surprise, right? That raid is about saving Orchephon. So what if we had the reverse, where instead of saving Orchephon, it's about killing someone? So the whole ultimate is about killing Vuk Lamat, like doing our best to kill.
Blue Typhoon said, if they make a time travel story about trying to save characters fated to die, subs would triple overnight. All FF14 players need is a character to become attached to.
But I do feel like, again, this is one of the reasons I kind of oppose time travel. Because it kind of cheapens these things, right? I'm actually glad that both Oshefon and Usail stayed dead. Like, they're one of the rare cases in FF14 where a character actually dies. Actually, this is interesting because this is, in my opinion, okay, I'm kind of improvising this, but when we're talking about what we want to see in 8.0, I would actually add this. I want to have some tension in the story, and I'll actually give you guys a prime example of this. When you fight Estinian, or rather Nidhogg, Nidstinian, whatever, in 3.3, and after you defeat him, you know, you have that whole cutscene where, you know, you try to like pull the ice, and, you know, they play Dragon Song, and, you know, you see the ghosts of Oshefon and Usail, and you start really crying, and, you know, you have that whole sequence. I feel like one reason it works is because there is real tension there. You are actually not sure whether Estinian is gonna survive this. You know, he might actually die here. And the reason for that is because the story set a precedent up until that point that characters are not invulnerable with plot armor. They can actually die in this story, and that has happened multiple times before this. And I feel like this is a big element that is missing from FF14. And me personally, the biggest blame is probably to do with Stormblood, because Stormblood was like the expansion of fake out deaths, right? First you had
Y'shtola?
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, oh my god, I can't believe I forgot her name. The Tsukuyomi who becomes Tsukuyomi. Yotsu.
Oh, Yutsu, yeah.
Yeah, Yotsu, I think she was. You can tell, guys, that I haven't played Stormblood in ages because I'm starting to forget the names, bro. But yeah, so first you had Y'shtola at the very beginning. Then you had Yotsuyu and Gosetsu. Then you had Xenos comes back. And probably the worst is when they have fucking Gaius just pops up in 4.5. I still remember that was such a cringe moment. I'm not gonna lie, man. The way he just comes back with like no explanation. If you guys have played is it like Modern Warfare 2 or something? It was kind of like the same explanation, like I wasn't in that tank. Or like Palpatine has returned. You know, it was that kind of moment where this dude just pops up and it's like, bro, shouldn't you be dead? Like, it was absolutely embarrassing. So in my opinion, I blame mostly Stormblood. Of course, ever since then, you know, they've had ridiculous moments in Shadowbringers as well, and stuff like that. I feel like this is a very common thing, by the way, with Japanese writers, and indeed in the Final Fantasy series. You know, I'm not gonna name what game it is, because I feel like that would be a spoiler in itself. But there is one Final Fantasy game, it's one of the earlier ones, that is kind of notorious for having like 2 gazillion fake out deaths. Like every 5 minutes, some character is doing like a heroic sacrifice, but in the end, no one dies. So I feel like it's like a common trope. And me personally, I don't like it, right? Because it just weakens the impact of the story and just deflates all tension. So, how can they fix this? I feel like it's difficult to fix now because, like I said at the beginning, you can't also just, at this point, kill off like a Scion. I feel like that would be really cheap. So you would maybe have to do kind of like Heavensward with, for example, you say like you develop a new character and then kill them off or something. So in a nutshell, I want to have some tension return to the story. That would be one of my hopes for 8.0. Yeah.
Blue Typhoon says, dude, I hated that so much. I know which FF you're talking about. The literal hell death was the worst offender.
If you guys don't know what we're talking about, basically, I can describe the event, again, without mentioning the game, without mentioning the name of the character or anything, just broadly. in one of the earlier F games, there is a character who does like something absolutely ridiculous. Like blows themselves up, basically. And you know, you just think like, oh, he should have died. And then like a few scenes later, he's just chilling, you know, in a hospital bed. And it's just... At some point, you just feel like they're taking the piss. You know, it's the same thing with, for example, Tancreds. I talk about this in my Tancred video. My upcoming analysis on Tancred. I talk about this scene quite extensively in that analysis, in fact. You know, the whole, like, fake-out death scene he has in Shadowbringers. In my opinion, it's completely, like, pointless. Because it's like, why is that even there? Like, just remove it. Like, clearly they were not gonna kill Tancred. And in fact, in that video, I make the argument that killing Tancred at that point would have been a terrible writing decision anyway. So in my opinion, it's not about like, oh, should Tancred have died? To me, the matter is more like, why add that scene? Right? Just fucking get rid of it, because it adds nothing to the story, in my opinion. I don't know, I feel like it's some kind of mentality of like, by the writers, that they want to have the cake and eat it too, right? Because when you add a character death scene, well, death scene, a fake out death, you basically get the free, you know, emotional impact from the player, right? But because it's a fake death, you don't have to actually commit to it, right? You don't have to kill the character, so it's like, oh, it's a perfect solution, right? But unfortunately, it really hurts the story in the long term, because it makes consequences and character decisions, character agency not matter, and again just deflates all tension, because you know that nobody's gonna die anyway, so who cares, right? Like, for example, I can give you a good example of this in Dawn Trail. You know, you have that one moment where the Bakul Jaja's, like his gang, you know, they're threatening Wook's biological father or something, right? And they're like, oh, we're gonna kill this old man, yeah, we're gonna whack him, or whatever they say. And it's kind of like, bro, who are you joking? Like, we're playing Final Fantasy XIV Dawn Trail. Like, ain't nobody dying in this story, dude. Unless it's like, well, actually, no, I'm wrong, because in this case, it was like an NPC. I guess they could have killed them, yeah. Okay, that's fair. Now, of course, this is not completely true. There are a handful of instances where they did commit to actually killing a character. Benar comes to mind as an example. The writers even, I remember after Endwalker, the writers even, I think it was actually Yoshida said, like in a Famitsu interview or something, he said that he straight up came out and said, like, guys, Heidelin is dead, she's not coming back, like, she's just fully gone. So it's not completely true, like, sometimes they do commit to killing a character, and of course, you know, we had some deaths in Dawn Trail as well. But again, it's usually only like someone who's not very relevant, or it's like a very convenient point, like, oh, everything's like neatly wrapped up. I feel like in the case of Heidelin, for example, it definitely made a lot more sense to remove her from the story. Yeah, so I don't know, add more tension, basically. That's my argument.
Blue Typhoon says if it's like they killed every character once just to bring them back an hour later.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, guys, to wrap this thing up at the end here, what do I want to see from 8.0? Are the following things. Number one, I would like to see a more grounded story. I want to see a new set of characters. Basically, give the spotlight to the new characters. So that's number two. Number three, what I don't want to see, I don't want to have like a multiverse thing at all. Please don't do that. Try to avoid it, please. I know it's gonna happen eventually, right? Like, let's be honest, guys. Like, once you know, we've explored all of the source and a bunch of shots, like, of course, you know, that's the problem, right? With a story that runs as long as FF14, you're gonna run out of ideas eventually. So I feel like the whole multiverse thing, it's kind of inevitable. Like, the whole, like, oh, maybe we go back to, like, the Allergan Empire time or whatever. It's gonna happen, unfortunately, but I hope it doesn't happen yet. That would be my opinion. Soilia
says,
hello.
Says I'm okay with time travel if we get to see the War of the Magi. I mean, that's a good point.
Well,
I would be okay with that too.
Well, like I said earlier, like, it is kind of inevitable. Like, it does make for good fan service, right? You know, you can have like, oh, the Elegant Empire, the 3rd Astral Era, or the 5th Astral Era, you know, the like the golden era of magic, right? And seeing all the 12 city-states back then. Of course, you know, it is cool and it is a concept, but I don't know. Again, I feel like it's just kind of cheap. I'm not gonna lie, it's kind of like just fan service. Maybe I'm more amenable to it in the future, when there are less things to do. Because I feel like right now there are other things that we could still focus on. So in my opinion, it's unnecessary right now. But I do understand why people want it. Though, of course, I must say, it also depends a lot on the execution, right? Whether it's just done in a very lazy and boring way, or if it's actually interesting. So, of course, like, I'm not shutting down the idea completely. It's just that, I don't know, maybe it's just because of all the, like, stuff we've seen come out with Marvel from the past few years. Maybe that's just like, it's just some fatigue, right, from the multiverse thing. Maybe it's that, I don't know. And the 4th thing I want to see is to have more tension. So basically undo the damage done by the constant fake out deaths and, you know, make character decisions actually matter and have more consequences in the story. So those are basically the overarching things I want to see in 8.0 in terms of story. But of course, we can cover this topic from so many more angles. You know, we could talk more details. I feel like we'll probably get to discussing the details more when we actually have the fan fests and we have some idea of what's actually gonna happen. And of course, we could also talk about gameplay. God knows there's a lot of people who are already getting really tired of, you know, the homogenized jobs and so on. Like, of course, we could also discuss that. But this discussion was more focused on, like, major story elements. So those are the 4 things. Tension, new characters, don't add time travel, and more grounded story. Thanks once again, and I'll see you next time. Yeah, have a nice day.
Awesome.